Oh, you're still muted, Catherine. There we go.
Can you guys hear me now? Hi.
Yes.
Hello. I am so honored. Thank you, Joanna. And I'm really honored to speak again for Groves Academy about cultivating brilliance in middle schoolers. I want to extend my gratitude for anyone who's here tonight as well. I know your lives are busy, and this is such a tough time in our country, and having our children in distance learning or hybrid learning or whatever format, it's still quite a different process, particularly for parents whose kids learn differently. I wanted to share a little bit about myself. I'm a child adolescent psychologist, and I've been practicing for over 20 years now. My son is 21 now. He's a junior in college, and let's see, we've been in Minnesota since he was 4, and that's around the time I started really suspecting something may be going on just because of his activity level. And yeah, mostly it was his heightened activity level at this age. I'll talk to you a little bit more bits and pieces about my own experience as a parent, and I'll share as part of the presentation. I try to always embed experiences that I've had as a clinician. My hope for you in this 90-minute class is that you try the best you can to relax and get a beverage and let me take you into this ADHD world where I give you some tips. And hopefully, one of the things that often happens for parents is that by the time you know your child has ADHD, there's often some guilt that comes along with that, because of course our parenting prior to that may not have been in line with what I'm going to share tonight. And I am 100% not into trying to create perfect parents or anything close to that. More, my focus as a psychologist and speaker is to empower parents and kids so that you are a better parent for your child. And since ADHD is such a family diagnosis, that you really have a better sense of how to create success in your own family and for you. Let's see if there's anything else of the introduction part. The information I'm presenting is very research-based. Every child is different, though, that has ADHD, so some parts will fit and some won't. The other piece, I refer to teenagers that do not have a diagnosis of ADHD as neurotypical. You probably know that by reading information, but I've had people ask me about that in the past. So let's get started. Okay. Let me see here, going on. All right. So I decided to share a 3-minute video. It's a video I made when I founded my organization, ADHD&U, and it just gives a sense of my story to kind of anchor this presentation. Let's see. It worked a minute ago. Why isn't it working now? There we go. Okay. Have you ever had a defining moment in your life that you knew would change your future forever? Let me take you back to December of 2006. I was at the office on a Friday afternoon practicing child psychology, and my last client of the day called and canceled, which is something that rarely happens in my profession. So I immediately packed up my stuff, got on my heavy down coat and my hat and gloves, and headed off to pick up my son, who was 7 years old, at elementary school. I got to my son's school and was quickly going down the hallway, and I heard this huge collective burst of laughter. So I got to his classroom and I peered in and I looked for him and didn't see him. And then I made eye contact with Mrs. Smith, his teacher, his first grade teacher. And she just pointed with this kind of stern look next door. And at that moment, my heart sank, because I knew that it was actually Fun Friday, which is a day that Mrs. Smith had developed for the rule following kids. My son had never gotten to
participate in Fun Friday. He was diagnosed with ADHD in kindergarten, and as you parents know, our kids do things differently. That kind of an expectation where you have to always raise your hand before speaking and stay in your seat and do your work quietly, that kind of stuff is really tough for our kids. I made a decision that day to be a fierce advocate for him. And all of that is why I'm passionate about ADHD&U and giving you the tools to be a fierce advocate for your child too.
Yes, he still has that mischievous look, doesn't he? Years later. Okay. So, what does cultivating brilliance mean? So, in terms of the semantics of the term that I use, when I first started thinking about the word brilliance in terms of what I wanted to really cultivate in children as I was developing my practice, it felt a little showy for Minnesota to be talking about brilliance. But the truth is, kids with ADHD, that is an honest expression of what I see in the children who have this diagnosis. There's something extra about them. I would assume that as parents, you can relate to what I'm talking about. There's so many artists and just children who think outside of the box. So when I wrote my book entitled Raising Will, Surviving the Brilliance and Blues of ADHD, the brilliant part for him has really been the music, that he's a guitarist and a musician. And then the blues part, of course, is something we'll talk about as well, that the tougher parts. So cultivating brilliance in your teen, to me, means helping your teen build confidence and develop and maintain friendships, cope with stress. We know that the ADHD brain, that coping is harder neurologically. Plan and organize, understand the brain. So helping your teen understand their strengths and weaknesses neurologically, use their talents. So areas of brilliance, I like this child's body posture because obviously it's a child in that moment who's looking quite confident. And when I see kids like this, it's such a relief. Often that's a child maybe at the end of doing something they feel wonderful about, which it's our kids get more hits, I would say, in terms of criticism, and they struggle a bit more. So we want our children to have confidence where they can really put their shoulders back and feel proud. Let's look at a few common areas of brilliance. So creativity is something that I often see, that I mention. Musicians, writers, kids. So many of the kids I see are really good athletically, often in individual sports, visual arts, in theater, whatever your child loves, Legos, whatever it is. Kids with ADHD can tend to focus quite well on their interests. That's right. So hyper-focusing, and this is something that often brings parents to me saying, I wonder if my child may have ADHD, but they focus so well on interests. I think maybe I'm wrong, or maybe it's not correct. And so one of the things I often share with parents is that kids with ADHD can focus on their interests better than neurotypical kids. Energetic. This is a wonderful quality. My husband, when our son was really little and he was so energetic and wasn't sleeping and all of that, my husband used to remind me, it's going to be great that he has this high energy later in life. And being inventive. Two of the children that I've been doing, virtual therapy this week, have both shown me things hanging from their ceilings that are amazing, that are like a plane that they've created. Another one was like this Art Deco kind of sculpture. So definitely creative thinkers, intuitive. This is something, it's interesting because the level of intuition, children, whether they're on the autism spectrum or they have ADHD, many of our kids have a certain intuition. They may not be able to put their feelings into words, but they sense things quite well. And compassionate. Yeah, I see this a lot. Just extremely dear souls who are very, very sensitive and compassionate. Natural leaders. This can be viewed as a challenge because often our children want to be in charge. I know my son was excited about like being the king of the playground and stuff like that at certain points. But the leadership quality is such a wonderful quality if the child is taught the social skills to make that shine. Challenges. So there's many challenges that are in the research and the literature about children in the middle school years with ADHD. Forgetfulness is a big one. And I want to tell you, parents, that if your child is highly, highly forgetful, it's important to remember that their brain is still developing and that this will not always be as big of a problem as it is in middle school. At least it isn't for the majority of people with ADHD. And this is a great thing to keep in mind and to try not to panic about the future. So forgetfulness, we know that there's parts of the brain, and I'll talk about that in another slide, but where holding on to multiple steps is really, really tough. Being careless. So there's a tendency to rush through things and some of that is really related to the impulsivity. So with math problems, there's often, multiple errors. And when I'm doing testing and I'm assessing that, I will have a child go back to that math problem and look at it again so that I'm not, misgauging their actual math skills. The other piece that's often a challenge is just the social immaturity. So numerous studies have shown that kids with ADHD are about 2 to 3 years behind their peers in social development. So if your child is 12, very possibly your child will want to hang out with kids that are 9 or even 8 or 7, even if their intellectual abilities are right on track. I often see kids who have ADHD enjoying hanging out with older kids. It's their peers that the struggle often occurs mostly with. Difficulty thinking beyond today. So this again is something that tends to improve. Sequencing of time is very, very hard. So planning a play date even for a middle schooler, you'll say, well, you need to plan ahead. And so if you're a parent and you're helping prompt that and saying, well, we need to call several days ahead of time, you're not being a rescuer parent or overly enmeshed. You're actually helping your child with a neurological deficit that they will do much better in later in life. Let's see. Tracking directions. This is still something for my 21-year-old that is much easier, but I notice that he is now making a lot of notes for himself. He's home from college and I see him writing things down, all the stuff that we as parents want them to do, that we say, write that down, or at least I did. I was often cueing him to do, and now he's naturally doing and has been for several years, just knowing the different ways he keeps himself on track. Anxiety is another really common challenge for kids that have uneven development period, and ADHD is pretty jagged, the cognitive development there. So symptoms of ADHD that are common, again, forgetfulness is really common. Avoiding many tasks that require, that are outside of their areas of interest. I call this like when the teen is like, I'm hungry. Oh, what do? I'm tired. I need a break. Those are often it's fine if they've had a snack, but I know that my son would be engaging something or a client of mine that they really like. And then when I try to bring them to do something outside of an interest, you get a lot of excuses. And I try to not get into like a judgment call. Instead, more say, I notice it's hard to focus. Why don't we do this? Why don't you, like today, I was with a kid who was all over the place during the session with his parents. And so he went in the other room and got a weighted blanket and put it on his lap and a fidget to help him focus because he was starting to avoid the therapy session. Planning ahead, again, is, like I said, it's really hard. And that's why I recommend that parents get a 504 or an IEP in place for their child. If they're at a school like Groves that it does a beautiful job with helping fill in these gaps and they're really trained at working with kids that have ADHD, then that's wonderful. And that's just a blessing. But if you're not at Groves or a school like that, then seeking out a 504 accommodation plan, and I have a slide about that later, is a really good idea. Grades being inconsistent with intellect. So you'll hear someone say, she's so smart, but her grades just don't show it at all. She gives up easily. Things like that are a sign that there may be something attention or learning based going on. Fidgetiness is another. In the middle school years, that hyperactivity is still, I would say there's still quite a bit of fidgetiness. And so I do a lot of allowing, I recommend that teachers allow the student with ADHD to stand behind their desk or do a puzzle in the back of the room if it's not too disruptive. Lots of different, I've written a lot of blogs on things like this too on my website. So if you go to KQ ADHD&U, and that's AND, you'll see blogs that I've written about these topics as well. Quick to anger is another, it's really thought to be highly frontal lobe related. So the frontal lobe helps us regulate our emotions a lot. And so if you see your middle schooler just be, boom, really, really angry all of the sudden, try not to think they're going to be this terrible person when they get older, because that is also a function that's structurally and chemically based. And you don't want to tolerate, anger, huge anger outbursts. Certainly want to problem solve it, but try not to make a big judgment about your teen or what they're going to be like in the future. Okay, so diagnoses that are often associated with ADHD in youth, the research shows that 30% of kids with ADHD, around that number, have a diagnosable anxiety disorder. About 17% have a mood disorder. About 5 in 10 of children with ADHD also meet criteria for a behavior disorder. It's hard for me to remember, sorry, such as oppositional defiant disorder, where they're often quite argumentative, disrespectful towards authority figures. Learning disabilities, the research shows about 30 to 50% of kids with ADHD meet criteria for dysgraphia, like a writing disability, dyslexia affecting reading, or dyscalculia affecting math. So let's talk brain chemistry and ADHD. So there's structural differences in the brain as well as chemical. And by structural differences, the brains of teens with ADHD are smaller in certain subcortical regions, such as the frontal lobe, that regulates focus, planning and organization, keeping track of time. The hippocampus helps with memory. The amygdala is also, it's an area of the brain that helps a lot with emotion regulation. And the corpus callosum is a part that connects the two hemispheres. And so obviously if that's smaller, it's harder for communication to occur back and forth between the different hemispheres. These size differences do lessen over time. And I think that obviously we see this improvement in functioning as our teens get older, which is nice. Chemical differences in the brain, let's talk about that piece. So ADHD is associated with lower levels of certain neurotransmitters like dopamine. And so if you look, there's a gap between neurons, which is called a synapse. And in order for the message to be passed along, the synapse needs to be filled with a neurotransmitter. And neurotransmitters are chemical messengers, and they're responsible for different functions. So some research studies have shown that people with ADHD have less dopamine and norepinephrine, which are the neurotransmitters that help people focus. All right. So stimulant medications such as Ritalin actually encourage dopamine production. So let's talk about how to quiet the storm with your teen. What works? Let's look. So asking your teen about their experience and being quiet, or just prompting and saying, tell me more about that. We tend to talk way too much, and that is out of nervousness. I've done it for years and I have to work really, really hard, but I've gotten a lot better the more I've practiced it, the more counseling I've done myself, but really just thinking of ourselves as someone who's trying to learn, who doesn't have the answer, who's really trying to understand what's happening with our teen. Focus on what your teen is doing right, and then praise. So we have to be genuine, because if we're being fake, they know. Keep ADHD in mind. This is a tricky one. People often say, don't focus on the disability. But I believe, and Russell Barkley is one of the big researchers in this area, and he talks a lot about keeping the disability in mind. Such like thinking about the framework of the brain, and if the hippocampus is actually smaller, which we know it is in many people with ADHD, instead of us saying, getting hard on our kid for getting things, really trying to remember that there's a huge neurological basis to this. Try not to take your teen's behaviors personally. I am still working on this. I have an 18-year-old at home. Trust your gut. So, trust your gut. If it seems like something's up at school and, it seems like your child is feeling really down about how things are going at school, but maybe your child is saying, no, everything's fine, but they seem really stressed, trust your gut and try to figure out more about what's happening. Show your teen, do not always tell. So in the showing part, I will give an example. My husband will tell our son to mow a certain part of the lawn, but he will point to an area from the inside, and we have a big lawn, and he will tell him, and my son will mow the wrong part. Or I can't even express the details that go on here, but my husband has had a hard time learning. Show him, don't just tell him what you want him to do. Show him how you want this, the recycling done, or show him. And so that is something that kids with ADHD need a lot more showing than telling, in my experience. Set up your environment at home for success. So if you have a teen that has a big problem with gaming too much, try not to create a room that your teen is in that has all kinds of gaming wonders when you don't want your teen to be doing that. Or, really set up the environment. I mean, I think of it this way. Would you send someone that's struggling with an alcohol problem, you're not going to have bottles of alcohol over. And if your teen is really impulsive and they take money from you, be really careful about where you put your money, and try not to just have it out tempting your teen all of the time, because eventually with the right kind of supports in place, your teen hopefully will get to the place where they're not nearly as tempted. Never worry alone. That's Edward Hallwell, and I agree so much. If you're, make sure that you have your support system in place. For me, it's a few friends that I've always been able to talk to about my stressors. Some psychologist friends, we share with each other and help guide each other. There's the people that you talk to that it's not helpful. Maybe they're going to jack up your anxiety, or they're just not very sensitive. Those aren't the people to worry to, but get your supports in place so that, a lot of parents who have kids who are in high school or middle school who are struggling with learning, they participate in their own counseling, because guess what? You can use it as parent guidance, and you can troubleshoot with an expert about how to look outside of your own box and think differently. If other therapies are not working well, and I mean that, I'm not one to say go to medication first, but if you've tried a lot of strategies, you're working with the school, you are doing a lot of work with a psychologist already, and your teen is exercising and eating relatively well, medication is effective based on research in 70 to 80% of teens who have ADHD. So that's something we can talk a little bit more about too. Involve your teen in physical activities. I hit this hard at the office. My office now is home because I'm seeing everyone virtually, but having some kind of physical exercise, and I wouldn't pose it like, do you want to exercise today? It would be more like, what kind of exercise? Let's plan it out. What will you do today? And, we can have it be the extra, and I would plan it out at the beginning of the week, looking at, all right, so do you want to be on the treadmill for half an hour and watching your favorite show during that time? I mean, make it pleasant. Or some kids would never want to do that. They'd only want to do a group sport activity, but it really needs to be something where they're getting physical exercise. John Rady, who he's written with Edward Hallwell, and he's doing the keynote speech this week for the Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Disorder convention that I'm speaking at as well. But John Rady, if you haven't read his research on exercise and ADHD, you really should. He's got a lot of great information on that. And he wrote a book called Spark right in there. So cardio activity really helps kids with ADHD a lot. So seek specialized tutoring for academic struggles. I was just with a child who was earlier today, and he was telling me how stressed he's been in math lately. He's 12, and he's so overwhelmed that like he hides under the table at times at home, actually, when parents are trying to get him to do work. But he basically explained to me that the work is just too hard. And so his parents are going to get more support in place for him at school. And they were asking him, do you think you need more help? And honestly, I think many 12-year-olds are just not sure. So if your teen is avoiding academic work and seeming really stressed, one-on-one support is so helpful. It's just a giant stress reliever. We did a ton of it. Sometimes we hired teens in the neighborhood to help my son with math. Our daughter is getting help in mathnasium right now and does not have ADHD, and it's just a huge stress reliever for her. So academic tutoring, Groves does a beautiful job in these areas. If that is not in your wheelhouse, or you can't afford something like that, look into if your school has professionals there who know Orton Gillingham, which is a reading and writing methodology for enhancing those skills in kids with learning disabilities. Let's see, okay, spend one-on-one time with your teen. So during that time, try not to give unsolicited advice. This is very tough for all of us, but just be thinking about it and just try. And if you do say, hey, you probably don't want my advice, sometimes it just slips out. This can be like a 20-minute walk with your teen. It doesn't need to be some big activity, but it's more where you're just saying, hey, I want to spend time with you. Can we walk the dog? Will you walk the dog with me? Or why don't you come in and let's go through my winter clothes and see which ones you like, or, whatever it is. It's just something that you're saying, you matter to me, and I don't want it to all be about school. I just want to hang out with you, and use positive reinforcement, Talk openly about the diagnosis. I think, let me go back. This one is tricky because we don't want everything to be about ADHD, but many families will tell me that they haven't had any discussions with their teen, like about their diagnosis. And I think it can become something where the teen senses something's really wrong with me, but no one's telling me. And I actually don't think there's something terribly wrong with anyone that has ADHD. It's more that they learn differently. And so I think it's important to just start labeling it and saying, let's read these articles together. And, obviously you don't want to choose articles that you think seem frightening or poorly written, but let's start looking at some of the information on ADHD and seeing what might be harder and what might be easier, and involving your teen. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that. Because if we don't talk openly with our teens, they fill in these gaps with information that is often unfavorable to them, like I'm stupid or I'm lazy. Mental health support is particularly now where the stress is so much higher given the pandemic, and many kids with ADHD have higher anxiety. So they're worrying about their safety, and then they have school to worry about. And, if you're not comfortable with your child doing sessions with a psychologist where they would actually be going to the clinic, many psychologists are doing telecounseling, and it can take something off of your plate if you have that teen, if you have someone who's not only educating them about ADHD but really supporting them and doing that part. Again, it's being a lifeline for you too, because you have someone who then is supporting you as a parent. Yeah, monitoring electronic usage. This is a tricky one. I'm always dealing with this. It's like we say, we want you to have, for our 18-year-old, she just turned 18, but we want you to keep your phone downstairs. And then, like a week later, it's crept back up, in the middle of the night again for a week. So you're always, I wrote a blog about this. And if you want to go, again, it's on my website, all about different ways to help manage electronic usage, like categorizing screen time into meaningful based activities, or that have more, that relate more to family values, or doing things that really are just more spending, and hey, kids like TikTok. I think TikTok is really fun, but it maybe wouldn't be categorized in more of a meaningful activity. Whereas some games, if your child is on the screen playing a game where they're learning something, and it seems like, there's a lot of games like Civilization or various computer games that might be categorized more into a meaningful activity. But signing your child up for group activities, and again, this is tricky right now, but having your child have some structure in their day, because a lot of teens are in school for just maybe 3 hours, or in their days, or there's a lot more time they could be scrolling on their phones. And teens, the research really shows that there's a lot more depression when kids are hanging out on their phones for large chunks of the day. And they're not going to say to you, I think that I'm depressed because I'm on the screen too much. You as a parent just have to have the confidence to say, we're just not going to do that. And let's do this instead. Let's sign up for this, art class instead together and do this or that. Why is ADHD a family let me go back. Why is it a family diagnosis? So we're going to talk about that.
Hey,
That
Katherine?
it affects? Yeah.
We do have one question
Sure.
related to what we were just talking about. It says, do you have resources about ADHD geared towards teens, such as books or websites?
I do. My website has has a resource page. So if you go to my website, I have a lot of my favorite books as well. And yeah, so that would be my best. And also CHADD, it's all caps CHADD, Children and Adults with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, is a national organization that has tons of information, but I have CHADD on my website too. So I have all of those, the main organizations you'd want to tap into there.
Great. I'll chat in your website link into the chat. So if anyone needs it, it'll be there.
Okay. So ADHD is a family diagnosis because it's highly genetic. It impacts the whole family system. There's often one parent, 50% of the time, one parent has ADHD if you have a child with it. Siblings are really impacted. And outcomes improve when everybody learns about ADHD and gets support. So let's talk genetics first. So the research shows, like I said, it's passed down from parents to children. Adopted children are much more similar to the biological relatives on measures of ADHD than to their adoptive relatives. At least 1/3 of fathers diagnosed with ADHD in youth has a child with ADHD. And genes related to dopamine are being investigated to learn more about the transmission of ADHD. So let's talk about dopamine's role here for a minute. So scientists have observed that dopamine levels are different in people with ADHD than in those without. And studies have found that those with ADHD have lower levels of dopamine transporter proteins, which are responsible for regulating the dopamine levels in the brain. So you see this healthy diet piece, and that's a big part of it. So it's not all about medication here. And one of the things that is so important, and I had a very rigid eating son, so he ate like noodles and Parmesan, like the same kind of Parmesan for years, and had a lot of GI issues as a result of it. But, I'm not saying for parents to start having a huge food battle with your child and like trying to force them to eat certain things. But I am saying to keep the foods out of the house that you do not want them to be eating. Like, don't be buying a ton of Pop-Tarts if that's an off limits food. And proteins are referred to as dopamine transporter density. Okay. So I'm trying to give you some of the key words that so you'll have some familiarity if you read more in the research. And not all people with ADHD have dopamine transporter density, low DTD, which you'll read about this in the research. Not everybody. So again, it's like not everyone, but we're seeing this trend and pattern. So foods that can enhance dopamine that are vitamin rich, like the foods in this picture, go for it if your teen likes them. And the impact on the family, one of them is the financial stress. So one 2019 study from Medical Press found that raising a child with ADHD costs 5 times more than raising a child without it. I bet that doesn't surprise a lot of you. So like the learning and behavioral differences, there's often, multiple therapists involved, and the tutoring and higher rates of car accidents and fines and tickets, all those things add up. Our son, we were really lucky. He didn't have a big interest in driving until he was 18. So I also didn't encourage it a ton either. I feel like a lot of times teens have a general sense of when they're ready to drive, which that's what I've been seeing in my practice at least. Parents often have a loss in income due to missing work too. There's often a lot of stress in families too. We know that adults with ADHD have a higher incidence of substance abuse. So if one of the parents in the family is not getting their ADHD symptoms treated, many times they may be struggling with something like an anxiety disorder or depression or substance abuse. So that's another way that the stress can trickle down. Disruptive sleep. Many kids have a very hard time with sleep that causes stress on parents. That's what I was helping a family with today. Let's see, higher rates of divorce. Okay, so there's some upsides to this. So couples with an ADHD child are twice as likely to divorce by the time the child is 8 than couples without an ADHD child. But here's the good part. Once their child turns 8, if they've stayed together, they usually do. So that's the good news there. Siblings are significantly impacted. This has been the case for sure. And with our family, I would say our daughter, she's telling me a lot more now that she's older about what she wishes that, and especially she's seeing me write blogs and do presentations. And she's like, I do wish that you did these extra things for my brother. I do wish that you had given me more attention at times. And, we're working that out. And sometimes it's impossible. Like you can't do it evenly, the parenting part. But I have a blog I wrote about how to support siblings. And, a lot of that is doing something special for them. They're often seeing that ADHD child get something extra. Even if that child doesn't want it, they have to have the extra support with school. And so saying, what can I do with you? And, when you're at the grocery store, would you let's have you pick out a nail polish? Or your favorite food, whatever it is, to just show you're really special to me too. And what else do we know about the impact of raising a child with ADHD on parenting? So that, oppositional defiant disorder, the behavior disorders do really impact the kids that have more behavioral difficulties, there are more problems in the marriage. The bright spot I talked about is that the divorce rates don't increase after the age of 8. And so if parents hang in there and get the support they need and address the child's behavioral difficulties in a healthy way, then the oppositional defiant disorder, in my opinion, it's so often underlying anxiety and family dynamics that have developed that aren't healthy to try to manage the behaviors. So many things fall into place, I think, when you get the right support at school and privately. Okay, so let's talk about siblings for a minute. Okay, so there's a lot of disruptive behavior. You know, kids with ADHD struggle to stay in their bubble. So there's often the poking and the touching and all of those things. And I hear it so much. And the thing we have to remember and really remind the siblings is that it's not intentional. And we have to help the siblings. So we can't just continue to let it happen. We have to help that ADHD child have a different outlet. So if they're making a noise all the time that's driving everybody crazy, help, instead of saying stop, say, let's do this instead. And it's really like shifting the energy in a different way. So there is more aggression, and that is certainly not something to be tolerated. And that means you need to get somebody involved professionally if you have something like this going on, at least on any kind of regular basis. The hyperactivity can be very hard for the family, and therefore, you know, the families that do best, you know, they have the bouncy balls and the trampolines and all the different things to help channel the energy in a good way. Learning problems, that can be hard on the siblings too, just because, again, the school is that other child needs so much of the parent's attention. Kids with ADHD, the siblings often feel victimized. And that's what I mean by the effects of the disruption. Like they feel like the sibling is, and it's true, they are often, because regulating emotions is harder for kids with ADHD. That often comes out on siblings. So again, I think it's so important that parents do intervene, and not in a hard reprimanding way, but more in a problem-solving way. And the siblings of kids with ADHD, this has happened in our family too, where that sibling is trying to remember everything for the child who has the memory difficulty, and trying to say, oh, don't forget. She often, 3 years younger, was saying, William, don't forget this, don't forget that. And you know, I think that that's a stressor that many times we didn't intervene enough. We kind of just let her do that. And now looking back, it might have been nice if we said more to her about, you're not responsible. Again, hindsight is easy, right? But if you notice one of your siblings, one of your children is getting pretty parentified, taking care of that child, it probably will bite you in the butt later. So you may not want to promote that too much. And feeling some loss, like, hey, you know, it has been hard. You guys have had more family conflicts. And I also think it's very important to, I think I'm going to have this in a next slide, but really to not get too down on the child with ADHD in front of the siblings as much as you can. Like, try not to say, you're older, you should be the one that they're following, because that also turns siblings against each other. That's a blog there. So how to help. So plan one-on-one time with siblings, explain ADHD. This is a book, Corey Stories, that has a really nice job of explaining ADHD in a kid-friendly way. Go the extra mile for sibs too. Remind sibs there's just as important, and nurture positive sibling relationships. So do what you can to keep them on the same page and not try to do a lot of criticism of one or the other, or comparisons in front of that other child. Creating a home that's supportive for kids with ADHD is a big one here. Let's see, how am I doing with time? Okay. Studying near the parent. I just had a child agree this week to do his schoolwork near his mom, because he was doing it in his room and getting lost in YouTube videos for hours. So one-on-one with me, he was able to agree really that that's not a good fit for him. It doesn't meet his goals because he wants to really be able to have less fighting at home. And he knows a lot of the fighting is about him not getting his work done. So having sensory needs met in the study setting. So having something that child can squeeze or roll or chew, like popcorn or carrots or something to help engage the body so that that person can focus and sit still. Having a system so that the space looks organized. If it's a complete mess, that's going to be really, really hard for that child. And if you ask them to do it alone, obviously cleaning it up is going to be really hard. So those can be just activities you do together, and eventually it will shift. The stuff you teach will start showing up in your child. Limit distraction. So having the room set up so that you're not going to say, don't get on your phone. You're going to say, I'm going to have your phone, and why don't you, I'm going to have your phone while you do your work. You want to set it up so that that child, and if they say it's not fair, you say, you know what, I'm setting this up for success for you, and my job is to do that. So I'm going to have the phone for now so you can get your work done. So creating a manageable task list. I think many kids are so worried that have ADHD with how long something's going to take because focusing so hard. So I often just write 3 things on a list, like problems 1 through 10. And then I have one other thing. And then I have mow backyard, and then, check it off with that child as they go. Instead of this huge list, it will feel way too overwhelming. And rewards. Hey, Edward Hallwell talks a lot about giving rewards. It's just like we go to work and we get paid to go to work. So offering rewards, there's nothing wrong with offering your teen rewards for doing things that are hard. And being physically comfortable is huge. So having the comfortable sweats or whatever, because clothing bothers so many teens much more than neurotypical kids, because everything is more sensitive, their whole neurological system. So taking time to get the right drink or clothing and have the lighting kind of dim, whatever it is that feels comfortable, that's important. And really staying curious to what it is that helps your teen. So saying, oh, I didn't know. Your teen needs to know that you care, and that, and there's a lot of times where I've been like, I don't care, you just need to do this. But that's when I've lost my cool. And really, if I think about it, I don't want somebody demanding something from me. So when we can stay curious about what is helping, and if your child is successful with an activity, it's just like, what was it? What do you think helped? We always want to know. And encouraging that exercise is huge. Offering healthy foods and supplements. All right, let's talk about that. So protein-rich foods, poultry, fish, eggs, beans, nuts, soy, they're used by the body to make neurotransmitters, the chemicals released by the brain, okay? So they help you think more clearly, have more energy, and focus longer. Fruits and veggies are a big part of that. So let's talk about omega-3 fatty acids. Okay, foods like sardines, salmon, walnuts, flax seeds. Individuals with ADHD often have lower levels of omega-3. So we've been doing fish oil with my son for a very long time. And I read research in Lipids magazine, believe it or not, about omega-3s years and years ago. And there's some research that shows that the fatty acids also enhance reading skills. So for kids with severe ADHD, often changing diet is not sufficient, or one of these areas in really helping your child have. If it's severe, the diet alone probably won't be enough, but it's certainly helpful. And so healthy fats like avocado and coconut oil. Give yourself permission to buy food that will go bad. That's one of the things I really like. I've often felt guilty if all my produce goes bad, but you know what? You're wanting to have foods that are healthy for your child, and you'll eat them more. I think if you get into the pattern of doing it, it just takes effort. If you fall off the path and buy a whole bunch of junk food, that's okay. Just get back on the path. consider consulting with a naturopathic doctor. There's a guy at Prairie Care. His name is Dr. Timothy Culbert, Culbert. We saw him. You want someone who's licensed and that specializes, or certainly says they are knowledgeable about ADHD, but many times doing a hybrid with a traditional doctor and a licensed naturopathic doctor, you can get some great information from both. So let's see what else I had on this slide. Okay, zinc, iron, and magnesium, you'll see those a lot as listed as supplements that the naturopaths that we've worked with have often recommended supplementing with these vitamins. And avoid buying junk food. If you don't want your kids to have it, try not to buy it. Or if you do, hide it and don't let them see it. Just have it like in your room. That's what I do. Don't worry. Okay. So techniques for building healthy communication. So let's talk about this. Here is a little video I wanted to show you. See if I can get this going. Not sure why it's not going. That's a bummer. Well, let me go back. Okay.
It's very important when you explain ADHD to a child that you use a strength-based model, a model that does not include anything dangerous, negative, upsetting. The model that I like to use, that is in fact very accurate, is the following. I'll tell a child, guess what? I have great news for you. You have an amazing brain. You've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. I'll say, you know what a Ferrari is? They say, yeah. Well, your brain's like a race car. Your brain is way powerful, and that's great. You're a champion in the making. I say, but there's one problem. You've got bicycle brakes. You can't slow down when you need to, stop when you need to. And that's really what ADHD is all about. And the kids get it. Yeah, you're right. And I say, and I'm a brake specialist. So work with me and we'll strengthen your brakes. We can't do it overnight, but over the course of years, you'll build those brakes so you'll be able to stop when you need to, slow down when you need to, and win races instead of spinning out at the curve. That's truly what ADHD is all about. It's a state of relative disinhibition. You can't inhibit incoming stimuli, hence you're distractible. You can't inhibit outgoing impulses, hence you're impulsive and hyperactive. That's race car brain with bicycle brakes. I'm a brake specialist, strengthen your brakes. Kids buy into that enthusiastically. Instead of saying I have some deficit disorder that needs to get treated, say I've got a race car and I need to strengthen my brakes so I can be a champion. And that's the truth.
I love that. That's Edward Hallwell, and he has ADHD. He wrote Driven to Distraction, and I was on his podcast, Distraction, and then he was on mine, Finding Your Brilliance. And believe me, when both times I was on a podcast with him, I could tell he had ADHD because he literally went to let the dog out at one point and was distracted coming back. And it was very funny to me because people have questioned, how could he have been such a prolific writer with this diagnosis, believe me. And then there's a wonderful podcast episode of him talking with his wife on distraction. So if you go to the Distraction podcast and you look up marriage, Sue is his wife, and she talks a lot very openly with him about that piece. It's a really interesting one on spouses. I would highly recommend it. Okay, so having family meetings, I think that's a really helpful tool. So what's working and what isn't? And focusing on the solution. Let's talk about if this is a struggle for our family right now. It's okay to say what's not going well, but the primary purpose of the meeting is to figure out a solution and offer sensory supports during the meeting, So I have this basket and I put stuff in because I don't have ADHD, but I move a ton and I'm definitely restless, and pretty much everybody in my family is. So it's just nice to have something to fidget with during a meeting instead of expecting people to sit still. and keep the diagnosis in mind when you're having family meetings. So let's talk about what works. So John Gottman is a researcher who studied marriage quite a bit, and he has this magic 5-to-1 ratio, and I like to use it when I think about ADHD. So for every one negative interaction between you and your child, there needs to be 5 positives. We cannot script, we can't make the interactions be positive per se, but we can have that in mind. And maybe we can think about, for every one time we say, you know, you forgot to turn the light off, then we have 5 things we're saying. You were really sweet to your sister today, and thank you for walking the dog, and, you know, other things. So we're trying to really balance that out. Focus on solutions, not problems. Don't rehash previous conflicts. You know, this is tricky. I mean, you might need to say, this has been a pattern, but that's as much as I would really try to move into rehashing. Take a break if you're losing your cool. I do this regularly where and it's pretty powerful if your kids are not used to seeing you. I used to do it a lot, but if your kids are not used to seeing you take a break and then suddenly you're gone, they're like, whoa, then they're kind of left to kind of figure it out. And there's something nice about not trying to solve it all either sometimes. Keep biology in mind. So that means the brain part. Don't forget to listen. Keep your directions short. I think this is a big one. Trying to think about what exactly I need to say. So, you know, if, you know, whatever it is, instead of getting into some huge explanation, or your teen is maybe pulling you into some kind of a conflict, you just keep coming back to, this is what I need you to do right now. This and this. This is what I need. And you try to just stay focused on those simple parts. Think about, what is your teen's love language? Now, I think this is a little cheesy talking about love languages, but there's been a lot of talk about it. And so if your teen loves physical touch, you know, you may give them a reward of asking them, do they want a back rub after they finish a page of math? You know, maybe their love language is really verbal praise. So whatever it is, talk with them about it and then try to use it. This is a book, The 5 Love Languages of Teenagers. Apologize for your part. So, you know, it's so important for us to also, we don't have to get really down on ourselves, but when we screwed up, to own it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit, this assessment part. I'm looking at time and I'm going to go through it, but neuropsych testing is something that I've done a lot of. Groves Academy offers testing. The testing is so important for understanding more about your child and how they learn, as well as the psych part is really looking at, is there something going on clinically with anxiety or mood or something else? So really getting a sense, because once we know more about how your child is learning and cognitively functioning, you can really tailor a lot of your recommendations. So it evaluates brain functioning. There's a series of tasks designed to measure specific functions. Verbal reasoning, such as vocabulary development, visual reasoning, looking at problem solving without language, memory. This is so important. Looking at, can your child recall stories well or lists well? And if not, wow, we really want to look at, maybe that's part of why they're freaking out when they're being asked a bunch of stuff and they're just being verbally overloaded. Attention. So the tasks look at a lot of aspects of functioning. The social part is really interesting too. And the assessment should clarify strengths and have a lot of strengths, and also tap into challenges. And there should be very detailed recommendations that are not just rote, that should be scripted for your child to look specifically, and then that assessment shared. The cognitive functioning that's often impacted by ADHD. So attention, we know that. Sustaining it, shifting attention from one task to the next can be really hard, and can get teens will argue when you're asking them to shift many times. Motor skill development is often behind. Fine motor in particular, and handwriting is often behind in kids with ADHD. Memory, so working memory, that's the part of the brain that's holding on to short-term information like a phone number or quick steps on how to do something. That's hard. That short-term working memory is hard for kids with ADHD. Learning math facts, that rote memorization, that can be really tough. So there's a lot of accommodations for the child that can lower their stress level. With learning, reading, writing, and math, those are often impacted for kids that have ADHD. This is an old picture of the office I had before I left my last clinical setting that I was working at. That's an IQ test that was on my desk. So the Wechsler is often used to measure intellectual abilities. These are just some subtests. I'm not going to go into great detail on these, but if you're looking through testing, I do have a blog I also wrote on the importance of kind of how to use neuropsych testing in outside of that setting, like in therapy or in other parts of life. So you may want to check that out. There are computerized tasks that kids do that look at how well they sustain attention during like a boring task. They're really boring. They also look at, can your kid not press the X when they're supposed to not? So it really can measure impulsivity and the speed at which your child is working. Teacher and parent ratings can be very, very helpful. I will never provide a diagnosis of a child without getting some ratings or having communication with a teacher to know how they're doing in that setting. They look at attention, hyperactivity, impulsivity, the behavior of your child, motor skills. This is a Lafayette, it's like a pegboard task that neuropsychologists often do. And it's really helpful to get a sense of many kids with ADHD are quite behind with these areas. And no wonder note taking and all of that can be harder. So it gives it's a standardized way to say, wow, my child's skills in this area are like in the first percentile. No wonder writing all of this stuff is hard. And no wonder he or she or they may have a fit when they're asked to. So writing is just a complicated task that requires, there's often a lot of memory. Spelling is something. I'm talking now here more about the writing part that's assessed during testing as well. That's called the Beery VMI. Okay, so these are things that you will see, and I have some of this here in case you wanted to print out the presentation, so you could just reference it if your child has been tested to be able to say, oh, okay, this gives a little bit more about these tasks and why they're important. They're important because they help us know what kind of accommodations your child might need in school. Memory is, because teens have diminished prefrontal cortex, many teens with ADHD, that affects memory. So the frontal lobe looks a lot at behavior, judgment, memory, and emotional responses. So memory testing, this is a measure that's called the RAML that many of us use to look at memory skills. We look at stories. Many teens with ADHD are pretty good at recalling stories. It's more the rote information that's hard. So if your child is being expected to memorize tons of rote stuff, as a parent, you can say, you know what? My child needs accommodations in this area. It's not reasonable. She or he is getting a terrible stomach ache and failing these tests, and it's not fair because my child has ADHD. And so that's how testing can be really, really helpful for you and as an advocate. This is a complex task that we often ask kids to copy. It's called the RCFT. So measuring learning, standardized measures, again, every school uses different measures, but I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. But with a reading assessment, phonetic decoding should be looked at, comprehension, fluency. And you want someone, Groves does a great job. I do these kind of measures too, but you want someone who's really experienced to be evaluating your child. It's, with math. Like I said, math facts tend to be hard, and writing out steps tend to be really tricky for kids with ADHD. With writing essays, so if your child is struggling with writing, I would advise you to get someone on board who's a writing tutor, and don't try to muscle through it yourself with your child. Find someone to help you if that's possible. And spelling, if spelling is down the tubes, don't worry, you can use spell check. This is a really sweet video. I'm going to enlarge this. And this is what kids with ADHD wish you knew about their learning.
Dear teacher, I know it doesn't always seem like it, but I really do want to listen and learn. It's just my brain is kind of different. So this is what I'd like you to know about me. I have to move, or I really can't pay attention.
Even though I'm not looking at you, I can still listen to what you're saying.
If you tell me, sit up straight, now I have to use all of my brain to do just that.
It makes me feel sad when you tell me to try harder, even though I've already tried as hard as I can. I actually listen better when I'm rocking in my chair. When you give me a bunch of directions, I start to think I will never remember all of this. Sometimes my mom or dad ends up doing all of my homework. So here's how you could maybe help. Let me get up and move while I'm learning.
Let me look wherever I want when you talk to me.
Let me rock or slouch in my chair.
No matter what, please don't take away my recess. Give me a hug I could do all by myself. Make directions very short.
Just ask me, what does your brain need right now?
And one more thing. My brain might be different than yours, but it's still amazing. Sincerely, your student.
Your student.
Your student. Your student.
Hey, Catherine.
Yeah.
When the videos started, we could only see a portion of the screen.
Oh, really?
Kind of like zoomed in or something, yeah.
Did you see the one with Edward Hallwell?
No, it kind of zoomed in on like the top corner.
Oh, well, it's not. Well, that's so weird. I'm sorry. So with the one with him, you couldn't, could you? All right. Well, I can't, obviously I can't make it bigger then. I don't. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry about that. That's really good to know. I'll have to troubleshoot that. Behaviors I often see in teens with ADHD. Okay. Repeated questions about how much longer. This is, the reason I'm sharing this is because if your teen is asking you these things, it's a good indicator that they're really struggling to focus. Lots of movement, excessive talking, lots of tipping in the chair, lots of needing to get up, go to the bathroom. Drinking tons of water and eating excessively is a coping strategy I often see in teens who are not able to move enough. And when they're trying to do their work, that's why I often have like healthy snacks. Lots of sensitivity to noise. Teens with ADHD seem to hear everything, then appear pained by harder work many times, frustrating easily. Lots of need for repetition of instructions, although they may not ask me, they just do the task wrong. And so then I can tell they didn't get it. And many times grabbing stuff off my desk or just struggling to put on the brakes, like Dr. Hallwell said. Okay, how to use test results to help your teen thrive. Well, first of all, common testing patterns. So many times teens with ADHD have great vocabulary. And many times they're really great with building and doing hands-on activities. Story memory tends to be quite good for things they're interested in, the memory is often good. They often are very earnest and share quite honestly with me during clinical interviews about how they really feel, this is just a strength. Excellent memory for areas of interest, right? And ability to focus really well on interests. The things that tend to be hard, repeating back less meaningful information, holding on to things that are not as interesting. Processing speed, so copying information, you may be saying, why aren't you taking notes? Many times it's just their processing speed with the writing difficulty just simply cannot keep up doing it. And copying shapes or just motor skills in general that involve the pencil work, it's often hard. The recalling word list. So I read, if your teen is struggling with less meaningful memorized stuff like memorizing capitals of states and all that stuff, trying to develop a song with it or anything, then the rest of us memorizing it, we may not need as many tools. Okay, so if your child does neuropsych testing, consider requesting 2 feedbacks, one for parents and one for parents and the teen, so that the parent one, as a neuropsychologist, it's great to just be able to talk really easily and not have to think as much about what I'm going to say. And then I have one with the teen there where I'm talking mostly to the teen. Ask really specific questions like, what is my child's learning style? What are my child's strengths? What do you notice as the most significant struggles? And I would ask for help prioritizing recommendations, like ask them to number some for you even. And remember, you know your child best. Some of the recommendations won't fit. And set up a meeting with your child's teachers then to review the recommendations. Okay, so in the end, I just wanted to close by saying a Michael J. Fox quote that I thought was really, I liked it a lot, that acceptance doesn't mean resignation. It means understanding that something is what it is and there's going to be a way through it. That's what I view as a parent of a child who learns differently. It's like ADHD is what it is in his life. He has this amazing musical gift, and the struggles that he has will just keep helping him and remembering he's 21, but in many ways 18, and he's 21, but in some ways 25 intellectually in some areas. So that's what I would have to say about that. So I am open to questions. If anybody has questions, I'm happy to answer them.
All right, I think we have a few here. Let's see what we've got. One other questions going back to organizational systems. Just wondering what kind of suggestions you would have for organizational systems was one of the questions.
Okay, so what I often do with a child if they come into my office and they bring, before COVID, when I was seeing them more directly, is I would spend a session going through the child's notebook with that child and just asking them a lot of questions like, okay, just getting their input, like, tell me about this class and tell me where you want this paper, where should it, and just so that you're not doing it on your own, so that it's as much of a collaborative process as possible, and trying to not just completely take over. So if your child says, no, I need this here, even if it makes no sense to you, trying to just chip away at a system. So I have a philosophy of like, let's try to get your study space, try to make it inviting, try to have to go through, however you would organize schoolwork with them that makes sense. And then if they insist on doing something that you think may not work, you can say, well, let's try it this week. And then let's just, if it's not working after this week, let's shift it. I could be more specific with you if the question was more specific. I think in general, having your house really so that you have the coats, shoes, all of those things, so that the doing things in a very repetitive way, because kids with ADHD, if you have your morning routine really consistent and everybody knows, like in the end of the night, you put stuff where it's supposed to go with the child, or maybe you do it without them if they're doing something else, but you have as much order in your home as possible. I think that is huge. So if parents are really terrible at that, I would consider getting an organizational support. Many parents who have ADHD have like an ADHD coach who helps them so that you can have that then trickle down to your kids.
Gotcha. And then around neuropsych testing, someone's wondering, does it make sense to retake a neuropsych test as a teenager if they had one done at a younger age?
100%. Yes. So the young age is such a different brain than the teenager age. So the assessment, many times if a child has multiple diagnoses, when they're really little, I suggest they come in the next year because insurance typically will cover it every year. So I will say, okay, we're on the fence about dyslexia. We're not sure, but we know that this reading is lagging. I'd like to see your child in a year to a year and a half, and then let's follow up. And then at that point, you can go longer. So by the time they're a teen, you're going to get really different information.
Okay, great. And then kind of around the whole working from home, school from home, COVID fun that we're in, there's a few questions around that topic. Suggestions for virtual learning when the child is supposed to be on task but isn't. So many struggles all day when we're working from home. Yeah.
Golly, I hear you on that one. Yeah, I'm working with families on this right now. I would say I have a friend who I just interviewed on a podcast. It's my last podcast that's uploaded on my website. And I also have a blog that I wrote about it, and it's like 8 recommendations by a special education teacher. And so she's a special ed teacher, and she's talking about really one of the things she speaks a lot about in the blog, and it would be on finding your brilliance. The reason I'm referencing is because she just says for parents to understand that the teacher's job, the parent does not have to be the teacher. So if your child is really failing in this learning environment at home, something needs to change with their IEP. It has to be that the parent is not feeling like they're having to be the teacher. So my friend who's a teacher was saying, look, parents are not reaching out to us enough. That she wants parents to reach out more, and that's her. But I would think that what she was giving is parents permission to say, I'm really struggling. My child cannot do what's being expected, and we need some modifications here. So for example, if a child is supposed to, she was literally trying to get her son through this physical exercise routine for PE that was laughable. And so she said, one of her families was trying to do that. And she said, oh my goodness, go in the backyard and play with your child. She was wanting families to know that there should be, from a teacher perspective, some flex here. But we don't want your child to be lost and not progressing. So if your child is fighting you on homework, many times the homework is at the wrong level for your child. There's something off. And that's the main thing I would say. I don't know in your particular situation as families what you're noticing, or if you're noticing maybe your child is flipping to other activities instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing. I'm not sure. But I know one school I'm working closely with, it's CBA, it's a virtual academy, that they are doing a lot to help. I'm learning quite a bit from them on how they're gearing their assignments in a way to make it more interesting for distance learning. They're having really regular consultations with parents. So just don't do this alone, and let people know that you're struggling and you need help.
Yeah, we're all feeling it right now.
Yeah.
All right, one question going back to talking about supplements and diet. They're wondering what levels of zinc, iron, and magnesium are recommended as a supplement.
Yeah, that is one that I am not allowed to give information on, just because I'm not a medical doctor. But what I would ask your, and pediatricians may say that they're not sure, but a licensed naturopath would be able to give you that information safely. And we did that. Like the naturopath went through specifics. She weighed my son and did all the kind of things with him. And then she gave us a regime for us. And I, of course, researched it myself, and researched her quite a bit before I went to see her. So that's what I would suggest on that. And about the home environment, the learning environment too, I would make sure you have enough sensory supports on, in your arsenal at home, so that you are, if your child is getting really wiggly and they just can't do it anymore, have it set up, maybe, in the end of the night, just say, okay, let's make tomorrow a different day. Let's figure out what we're going to do, and have it be like, have a schedule set out so that you do have some exercise in there. And let's say you're trying to do it and it's just a huge bomb. If you don't have a child psychologist on board to help you too, that would be another thing that I would consider doing, to have that person be part of your team.
Great. Let's see, another diet-related question. Is there a connection between ADHD and cravings for sugar?
Oh, yes, like 100%. So much of a connection with cravings for carbs. And so I think that the way that I would say for families to address it is, don't try to take all carbs out of the diet. You're just wanting to, and don't become the person that doesn't allow any, but it's just looking in moderation, and having it be that we just were really careful. Or, honestly, my son was so rigid with food, we should have gotten an occupational therapist involved sooner. So I would say, if you're having a lot of rigidity, by middle school, if food is a real big problem, a dietitian can be a great idea. Having your pediatrician refer you to a dietitian who can really talk with your teen and you. And we had that. We had the guy that I mentioned who works for Prairie Care. I had him talk with my son quite a bit about food as well, and the gut and neurotransmitters in the gut, and just kind of explain more to him about food choices. And it did make a difference. It did help. And then, of course, I just stopped buying certain foods that were gigantic triggers for. So I would look at that, and just try not to pathologize your teen, like they're like thinking there's something so wrong. It's just that huge sugar burst is it gives a ton of energy, and kids with ADHD are also more impulsive, and they just want those foods.
Nice. All right. Let's see. Do you have an opinion about what type of schooling format works well for ADHD kids? For example, smaller class sizes, more art and music to focus, etc.
My take on it is, I've always done the smaller class sizes, recommended that. The kids that I see that do the best, they do so well in, classes like for high school, the performing arts high schools sometimes, but if your child is not into performing, of course you're not gonna, I would be like a wreck in one of those schools, because I never wanted to perform. I'd be nervous like all day long. But so you want to look at your child's interests, and then look at the level of support. And so we always tried to balance that. And the big, huge high schools, I mean, I've seen so many kids, they tend to fall through the cracks. Unless your student, I would say, if your student does not have learning disabilities, has ADHD, is responding well to medication, and your student is doing quite well, maybe the larger schools, that's an okay setting, but it's typically pretty tough.
Yeah. And what would you recommend for prioritizing assignments and tracking schoolwork for ADHD processing? It's very difficult for my 6th grader to find assignments online and then remember the due dates. Paper planner is better, or a day schedule, week at a glance. Curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, I hear a lot about this one, the Schoology and how kids are going between. And then I was listening to one child recently tell me in one class how he has to go back and forth between like 3 different systems. There's an app he's using, and then he has Schoology, and then there's something else he's doing too. And he was just describing we know the brain shifting is so tricky. So, I mean, I would, first of all, as a parent, really look and see what that, you know, how much time that seems to be taking, and just evaluate yourself. Like, can your child seem to navigate it? And if it just seems like really, really tough navigating it, I would talk to the school and say, all right, this is our specific situation, and see if there's something that could be worked out where, like, for this particular student, they dropped one of the systems and they're just using two. I can't remember what the third system was, like a Google Doc. He was having to then copy stuff, and he was mixing up a lot of the numbers of the page numbers. So the school took that system out for that child and modified it. Sometimes I would say a lot of what I did was just helping as the kids I see in my practice or my son was writing stuff down, I just did it alongside. But I would, again, if it's really, really complicated, the organizational part, and your child is getting like super anxious about it, I would try to troubleshoot it myself. And if our problem solving wasn't good enough, I would then say, this just isn't working. We need something different from the school.
Gotcha.
Sometimes, like for a 504, my son, every Wednesday and Friday school, he had someone check in with him in middle school every Wednesday and Friday to go through all his stuff with him. And it was one teacher, and they just did a complete notebook overhaul 2 days a week. And that was enough. Now that schooling is so much online, if someone could do that with your student, like if they could say, all right, we will do this and we will add this into your calendar, maybe that would, but something needs to happen to bring your child up to speed, so that it's not, because it's just a lot more difficult for our kids.
Well, I think that was all of the questions that had come in.
Okay.
Anybody have any more? Shoot them in now. All right.
Okay. Good night, you guys.
Thank you so much for attending, everyone. Keep your eye out. Oh, wait, maybe we do have one. Oh, no, just a thank you message. Okay.
Okay. You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Good night, everyone.
Okay. Good night.